Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Built in the Borderland. I am your host, Robert Holguin. On today's episode, we have an insightful and very interesting interview with Gloria Chavez. She is the woman in charge of the Border Patrol here in El Paso and New Mexico. And today we are talking about the growing migrant crisis at our border. Over the past several months, the U.S. has experienced record numbers of migrants attempting to enter the country, including a record number of unaccompanied minors. Tens of thousands are now in the care of the U.S. government. I've been hoping for a chance to interview Chief Chavez for weeks, and finally, last week, we sat down for a 30-minute one-on-one interview. Now, we touched on a number of different topics, not all of them related to migration. But before we get to the interview, let's get to know a little bit more about Chief Chavez. She is from Corpus Christi, Texas, originally. She was sector chief in California's El Centro sector before coming here on an interim basis in 2019 during the previous migrant surge. She officially became sector chief here in El Paso in February of last year. So we have heard conflicting perspectives about what's happening at the southwest border. Republicans are calling it a full-blown crisis, and they blame President Biden and his policies. The White House and some Democrats are saying that migration patterns like this one are cyclical, and that the Biden administration is just trying to stabilize a system that was dismantled by President Trump. So that's where my interview with Chief Chavez started. I wanted to know, is what's happening right now an unprecedented crisis? Which one is right? What's actually happening right now?
So, Robert, for us, this is not new when we get surges like this, especially in a sector like El Paso sector. We've had a surge of migration in other years, like, for example, the 2019 migration surge. Absolutely. Those were families and children. 182,000 people were apprehended right here in our region that extends all the way from Fort Hancock, Texas, all the way to Lordsburg, New Mexico. We had these large groups of 200, 300 people at a time. The largest group ever encountered by the Border Patrol in its history, over 1,000 people right here at the El Paso station. So migrant surges have happened. I always tell my workforce nowadays, we are a mature workforce. This is not our first rodeo. We've done this before, and we can manage it again. Now, with regard to whether it's seasonal, whether it's for different reasons, there's a variety of reasons why a lot of times these people make the intent to come across, right? And we can't forget about the organizations also, the criminal organizations that dedicate themselves to moving human cargo across our borders. And they are very particular about what is going on in the world. They look at everything. If I sit here today and tell you that they're not watching or scouting us on the areas of border barrier or areas where we have none, it would be unreal, because that is what they do every day. They evaluate, they do counter surveillance on our operations every day, and they plan ahead. So when criminal organizations are paying attention to what is going on in the United States, especially as it pertains to our border enforcement strategies, our infrastructure, the lack of technology, the lack of personnel. There's a lot of tactics that they use. Surges of families and children a lot of times happen because they know it's busy work for us. They know Border Patrol agents are going to have their hands tied, and that they're going to be focused in taking care of these children, taking care of the families, so that other types of events that a lot of times have criminal nature in them, that's where they push. They push in other areas because the agents are busy taking care of people in a certain location.
So then, if you were to compare this, you mentioned 2019, if you're to compare what's happening now to 2019, in regards to all those factors that you mentioned, is this singularly a different event, what we're seeing right now? Because we are seeing what's called self-separation at the border. We are seeing a lot of children, which might be different from the groups that you're talking about in 2019.
So it's a little different. And it's different in the sense that flow itself, if you just evaluate the amount of people that are crossing illegally between the ports of entry, it is a higher flow than in years past. because we're starting it. Our fiscal years start from October 1st to September 30th. So already on October 1st, as we start recording the entries coming in illegally between the ports of entry, it has had a higher flow than in years past. Now, that in itself doesn't tell the whole picture. What it really talks about is the migration portion of it. The other part is the actions that smuggling organizations are taking, to your point, where families are being separated south of the border in Mexico, getting ready to take advantage of whatever policy is available or in place at the time with our organization to make that entry and continue to exploit these people. So we are seeing all sorts of tactics being used by criminal organizations. In 2019, for example, there was family fraud. There was the renting of children, verified. We have information where the same child was used with different families crossing that border. How is that possible when it involves the vulnerable children? But it in fact takes place. If it wasn't for our partners over at ICE HSI, their Homeland Security Investigations, they helped us with rapid DNA. We were doing rapid DNA on families at the time. It was being conducted by HSI agents who are trained in doing this so that we could get a rapid confirmation whether that child actually belonged to that family or not. So the tactics, they don't change. They try different ways to try and exploit the system and try and exploit these human beings. So those are consistent. But the flow is a little higher than the years past.
Got it. One of those tactics resulted in that heartbreaking video that we saw of a little girl in the El Paso sector in Sunland Park, 2 little girls being dropped over the fence. I mean, that's the end result of a tactic that was pretty heartbreaking, I have to think.
Well, it is. And I was very appalled. I was very disappointed and just disgusted with that whole act because, Robert, along that border, there is barrier and then there's areas that have no barrier. A few miles to the east, there was no barrier, where kids themselves have turned themselves in to Border Patrol agents every day, all day long, all night long on that border. So what was the reason for these 2 guides or these 2 smugglers to bring those 2 innocent little girls to an area where there's a 14-foot barrier and then drop them from that barrier the way they did? So no, I think that, yeah, they're ruthless. To them, it's about the money. It's a commodity. And people continue to trust in them. They're going to exploit those human beings. They're going to exploit the children, which to me are the most vulnerable. Those are the ones that we really need to continue. Even to this date, we're continuing to track those 2 individuals to try and see who they are. We're working very close with Mexico, and hopefully very soon we have some good news on that.
Interesting. You mentioned policy, and you mentioned how the smuggling organizations will adjust based on policy. I know that you're an apolitical agency. Your job is to defend the border and to patrol the border. How difficult is it to do your job when policies shift as they have? In this case, I know Title 42 remains in place, meaning that people can be rapidly expelled, but children are being allowed in. So that policy change created a situation where your facilities now had to have and contend with a good deal of migrant children.
Yeah, so you're very familiar with our border culture, right? Our border environment, on how we deal with the entries of different types of demographics of people coming across illegally into the country. So, so we're a very apolitical organization. We don't take sides either way. Our focus is border enforcement and it's national security and ensuring that the policies that are cascaded down to the front line from our people in Washington or Congress, those are the policies and laws that we enact on the border. So, it's been now 25 years. This year will be my 26th year in the agency. I've worked for 5 different administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and different policies that change throughout. If there's one thing with the U.S. Border Patrol that we're used to, is the constant change. And that is something that we are getting better at because of the fact that we have endured this for so many years on the different policies that change. Right now, as you know, you mentioned Title 42. Title 42 for us is a very effective tool right now because it does 2 very important things for us. It limits the spread of COVID-19 throughout the community, throughout my workforce, and even the people that we're detaining on that border. And then secondly, it keeps the capacity down at our Border Patrol facilities to include our central processing center, where all people that we come into contact with, that we make an encounter, that need to stay in custody, that's where they go to get processed. So those are the two benefits right now with Title 42. Because Robert, if Title 42 did not exist, the Border Patrol would need to process these individuals as we have done in the past, where we encounter a person at the border, we make an identification that the person entered illegally, we determine their nationality, and then we put them in a van or a vehicle, transport them back to the Central Processing Center. They go to the Central Processing Center, it takes hours, sometimes days, depending on how many people we're backlogged with or that we're holding. It takes days for them to get released. In the meantime, what's happening at the Central Processing Center? More people are coming in and stacking up. More people are being held in these temporary holding cells, that it's becoming a little bit more difficult and more high risk, especially during a COVID-19 environment. So Title 42 for us has been very helpful, as it's kept our capacity levels down, because people that we encounter at the border are processed at the border immediately through mobile laptops, and then get transported in a vehicle to the nearest port of entry. I worked really hard with our local Mexican counterparts here in El Paso, like the Mexican consulate. There's several ports of entry in the El Paso region that extend from the West Texas region all the way to New Mexico. We have come to an agreement since the beginning of Title 42 back in March. Although the law authorizes me to expel every person at the nearest port of entry through any port of entry, I have worked very closely with my Mexican counterparts to ensure that it's done in the most humanely and more dignified way possible. So we've selected only 3 ports of entry that we will do Title 42: Paso del Norte, Isleta, and Columbus. And those are the only 3 ports of entry that we've expelled people for that reason.
We are just getting started. More of my interview with Chief Chavez is coming up right after this break. You mentioned your relationship with Mexican officials. You've been lauded for having a strong relationship with your counterparts on the other side of the border. And you're talking about how you've been able to make it work. It's not working in South Texas, right? Well, I shouldn't say that it's not working, but what's happened in South Texas is that they've hit capacity in terms of people being expelled because of Title 42. So we're having to have migrants flown to El Paso, San Diego to be expelled at those ports of entry. How long can that be sustained? In terms of, you've reached out to your counterparts in Juarez, what are you hearing from them about how long they can continue to accept Central American migrants?
So that's a really good question, because, we are only as effective as our relationship is, and with our counterparts in Mexico, and then how long they can sustain assisting us as well with these types of expulsions. The situation in the South Texas region, for example, became a bit overwhelming. I think to date, not to quote their numbers, but I think they're close to 200,000 people that they've encountered since October 1st to date, whereas we are about 80,000, 85,000 people here in the El Paso region. However, if the state of Chihuahua or the city of Ciudad Juarez, for example, one day says we are at full capacity, we cannot continue to absorb people being expelled through our ports of entry anymore, because they also have to deal with shelters, they have to deal with capacity at the different centers, then I'm going to have a situation on my hands. This is where now I will have to go and enact Plan B. Plan B meaning that now families and children will have to stay in our custody until they get processed, and then I need to work very closely with my counterpart ICE ERO to see if they have hotels available to hold folks, to process them, and or then my NGO partners, right? One of the things, I call them partners because I certainly couldn't do this job if it wasn't in liaison with our non-governmental organizations. In particular, Director Garcia over at Annunciation House has been phenomenal in working with us. And it's really a 3-prong approach. I call it the 3-prong approach because it's 3 of us. It's myself, Director Acosta from ICRO, and Director Garcia. Because those 3, the 3 of us work together in trying to figure out the transition of people in our custody. Robert, one of my priorities, and I say this to my agents all the time, we have no control of migration and how many people we encounter every day. They make that decision. That's a personal responsibility of the individual wanting to enter our country illegally every day. We have no control of that. We are on the receiving end of that. We also have no control on the disposition, where the person ends up and how long and where they're headed to their next step or their next destination. That's really on ICRO, a partner agency like now HHS, Health and Human Services for the children, or even Ruben Garcia from Annunciation House on the NGO side. However, what we do have control is the middle part, is the part where we are holding people temporarily while we continue to process them as fast as we can so that they can move on to their next step. While we hold them, the goal here, and I always say this, is that we get an A+, and that we ensure that the people in our custody remain safe, that they remain clean, that they get fed, and that they are healthy. And that is our priority. And then once we're done processing, they move on to that next step. Because there's a lot of things the Border Patrol can do and control. But the front end on that migration side or the disposition side on the end is not something of our focus. Our focus is while we have them in our custody.
That's an important distinction, and I'm glad that you point that out, because I think that is lost on a lot of people in terms of the role of the agency. And you've already answered my next question in part, but I think it bears mention that you're also known for having a very good relationship with the non-governmental organizations that you just mentioned. And there is respect that goes both ways. How did you achieve that? Because, and how important is that at a time like this?
So it is. So I think that, us having engagement with our local partners is very important. And I don't only engage with the non-governmental organizations, I also do it with local officials, and I also do it with the medical community. I looked and studied the aspects of every encounter that we do and what it touches. These are people. We're in the business of people. So I'm very relieved that now, as an organization, the Border Patrol has certainly evolved from years before to now, where we have medical personnel at most of our facilities, to include our central processing center, where at times there are physicians there and nurses every day that are evaluating and medically screening people before they enter our center. They are being medically screened. I think that's phenomenal. I think we should have been doing this for the last 20 years. It just started over the last 3 or 4 years, but it's a great effort in the right direction. Similarly, with children. Children now at our center, where we're holding these children, obviously our goal is to hold them for 72 hours. Here lately, because it is a struggle with Health and Human Services to have placement for the children, it's taking a little bit longer, but they have caretakers. We call them caretakers, and we have about 77 of them under a contract right now here in El Paso, and they are there to literally take care of children. That's what they do. Border Patrol agents don't do that. It's the caretaker. It's a contract that we've secured for that. We're becoming a little bit more evolved into the aspect of the mission that we have every day here on the border. So it wasn't difficult for me to really sit back and evaluate what an encounter, a person in our temporary custody, what areas do they touch? There are people sometimes that get injured from crossing illegally. Sometimes they scale the wall or the border barrier, or they run into something, or they come across with a broken ankle or something. We have to take them to the medical hospital. They have to go get evaluated. So it's very important to me to have liaison with our medical community and be in good partnership with them, especially during a COVID-19 pandemic. The other one are local officials in El Paso. Having contact with the mayor's office, having liaison with our local elected officials, so that they also are informed, are kept informed and educated on the things that we are doing as an organization on this border.
We still have more topics to tackle in this one-on-one interview. More coming up after this break. In terms of your career, looking back at 2+ decades of what you've done with this agency, and looking up at this wall, which is a wall that shows me you're the only woman on that wall, and a Latina woman at that. Give me a sense of reflection if you can. I know that you don't have much time to reflect when you're as busy as you are, but are you able to process a little bit about what's brought you to this point?
So I do. I think it's a great question. So thank you for asking. So yes, so here we have, this is my wall of chiefs, right, that have served in this sector. El Paso sector was born in 1924. This is one, if not the first sector for the Border Patrol on this border, right? And here's a picture of every chief from 1924 all the way before me. And yes, so one day my picture will go on that wall. as the only woman, the first woman here in the El Paso sector. So I'm very proud of that. I reflect back on my career. I think of the times when I was an agent on the border. I wish I had more years of that. I think that's the genuine, I think, just love for this country that one has. I think that when we go to the academy, it's ingrained in us how important our mission is, and it continues to be, right? And I love this country. You know, I call myself a natural-born Texan. I'm a Texas girl, and I love what I do. And I feel that as I reflect on my career, there has been so many opportunities, Robert. And I tell my staff and my agents when I talk to them, never hold back because you think you're not ready to take on that next step, or you're not ready to take on that next opportunity. Just do it. Do it and do your job well. Focus on what you're doing at the time of that job. Good things will come to you later if you just do your job the right way in the position that you're in now. And I've never been hesitant to not try something new. And I think that's why I've had these opportunities in a blessed career that have taken me not only to the southern border, but also the northern border of the country. Worked on the northern border with Canada, and then in Washington, D.C. for 2 tours, and then back out here. And now I'm in the best job ever. I'm the chief of El Paso in Texas. What else could I want, right? So I'm really proud of the career that I've had, and I just really feel that as Latinos, we're very passionate about the work that we are tasked with, and we are very ambitious to continue to do good things. And I feel very grateful for the opportunities that I've had in life. So I continue to just let it be my driving force, and not forget that at the end of the day, I'm a Border Patrol agent in a chief position. So I love what I do. Yeah.
Chief Chavez, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for spending this Sunday night with me. I hope you found that interview with Chief Chavez interesting and insightful. I will be back here next week. Until then, I am Robert Holguin. Take care, everyone.